The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Hello everyone, Ron once again, and the topic of this video is Additive EQ. So what is Additive EQ? Additive EQ is EQ that looks to change the character or the balance, the tonal balance that is, of a sound or signal, primarily by boosting certain frequencies or ranges rather than cutting. So you make the frequencies louder instead of turning them down. Primarily, that's what additive EQ is about. And now you would ask yourself, logically, when should you do this, right? There are terms such as bright or dark, cold or warm, muddy or clear, and they're pretty ambiguous, especially when you get into looking at distortion. The different terms that companies and people come up with, they are strange. But they all relate to certain qualities that we perceive about a sound or a mix of sounds. Brighter could be more clearly explained as having more pronounced high frequencies. Being dark is when higher frequencies are less pronounced. Muddiness is usually masking or lack of clarity in the low end, and a lot of times it's due to having too much reverb or too long reverb times. When the sound is cold or mix is cold, it means there's like less mid-range, and warm tends to mean there's more low mid-range. Additive EQ is what you want to use if you want to give a sound or mix a character like brightness or warmth that's more easily achieved by boosting than it is by cutting. So it's good for bringing clarity to a sound, for example, that's being masked in a mix as well, because you add upper harmonics, and upper harmonics add clarity. So as we discussed, if I play this sound, which is my voice, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You can see that the sound takes up the entire frequency range. Or let's say if I look at this regular vocal chain right here, every time I speak, there are frequencies all around the range. So the reason there's an increase here is because that increase brings clarity. Because the human ear is better at perceiving higher frequencies than lower ones, we're not particularly good at perceiving bass. That's why it has to be so loud. If you increase the higher frequencies, it brings clarity. Now you would ask yourself, where am I going to boost? You boost where it's needed, right? For example, you boost certain frequencies in a voice or mix to achieve higher clarity. That's one example. And I'm going to show you that in this case. But you wouldn't want to emphasize frequencies that don't sound good or sound unappealing. You would rather cut those, which seems to be common sense, right? It really can be that simple a lot of the times. It's not such a gigantic mystery. You just sort of use your ears. So examples of sounds that you don't want to increase are sibilants, such as a harsh S sound, or like the sound of a T or C, or even Z and F in some cases. Those are all sibilant frequencies, and when they're too harsh, it just doesn't sound good. That's actually sort of how you define harshness, when there are too many upper harmonics. So you'll hear, for example, some people speak the letter S so hard that they actually whistle while they do it. And you just don't want to be constantly hearing that while you're listening to somebody speak. Another example is a plosive, which usually comes from when a person is really close to the mic and they bump it, or they pronounce the letter P very hard. You obviously would not want to increase those. those are usually in the low, and so they're easier to take out because a lot of times they can be below the main information of a person's voice. Or you have programs like RX, and those are able to take them out. But basically, you boost the parts of it that sound good that you want to keep, and you would cut the ones that do not. How will you know what will sound good or how much to boost? That's the next question that I would expect. You won't fully know every time, especially as a beginner, right? Different sounds have different characters, different timbres, and different amounts of high frequencies. They have to sit differently in the mix. Sometimes when you boost a higher frequency, something will sound closer, and you just don't want it to sound quite that close, but you still want it to be clear sounding. So maybe try compression. It depends on the situation. So the fortunate part about that is that you can experiment in a DAW, which is a digital audio workstation like FL Studio here. They're non-destructive a lot of the time. So you shouldn't be afraid because you can usually reverse what you do, or you can start over. In the practical sense, you boost when you want more of a good sound. You cut when you want less of a bad sound. That's because when you increase a sound that has a defect, you increase the defect with the sound. It's like if you had a magnifying glass and there was a stain on your shirt and you wanted to magnify the shirt because the shirt looked nice. So you wanted to see the shirt more closely. You would also see the stain more closely. It's the same idea. The additive EQ is like when you make a loaf of bread on Monday at 3:45 and 30 seconds p.m. and it tastes good, so you decide I want more bread and you make 4 more of them so you can eat it each day that week. Why that time? You're very meticulous about when you make your bread for some reason. We don't mind. We just hope you share because you're really good at baking. Subtractive EQ is like when you spill apple juice on the counter at 2:13 and 45 seconds p.m. You don't go get a second kitchen and add another counter because that doesn't get rid of the apple juice. Instead, you clean the counter. Now, why that time? Because while watching this video, you learned something that blew your mind and unfortunately caused you to knock over your favorite drink. Thank God it didn't spill on your tablet because that would not have been good. Therefore, you increase a good sound until you like how it sounds, and you decrease an unappealing sound or resonance until you like the way the sound sounds overall. It's just like how you make as much bread as you want, that's additive, but you would clean your counter as effectively as you could, that is subtractive. If neither one of those works, then maybe you should do research to see if EQ is the necessary effect, or you should just experiment with another effect. What other effects might you try that will affect sonic quality or change the character and perhaps add brightness? Multiband compression, spectral shaping, saturation or distortion, multiband excitement, the plugin Fresh Air by Slate Digital, creating harmonies and mixing them with the original, sound doubling, compressing reverb, just to name a few. So now let's look at the audio example that I promised at the beginning. In continuing fashion, we're going to take the same audio that we had, Psalm 23, and we're going to add the second EQ now. So first, with the second EQ bypassed, this is what it sounded like with just the first EQ and the compressor. Turn the headphones up. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. And with the second EQ added, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Turn the headphones down. Now you'll notice an increase in the clarity of the words that I was speaking with the addition of the second EQ, which is the additive one. Despite this small cut that you see right here, It's mainly additive because the point of it is to add frequencies, but sometimes you just make an overall EQ curve. And so there's nothing wrong with having both. It depends on the situation. I didn't explain this high pass filter yet, or this high pass filter. The reason is because there's not a lot of useful information that you can gain from a person's voice below 80 hertz. Again, we're not good at perceiving bass, so it sort of is redundant. Now, why did I have an increase in clarity? I had an increase in clarity because, for one thing, remember the first EQ, which is subtractive, which was taking out the apple core, and we're making an apple pie now. We're not making applesauce anymore. So this is decoring the apples to get them ready for the pie. This is when you consolidate the apples, the good parts of them. So that means that here you have a louder sound that is going to sound more clear. Now, as I said, when I was talking about searching for resonance in the last video about subtractive EQ, the general idea, or at least in my process, where you can understand the words that are being said in a voice, those are the parts where clarity are achieved. So you take those parts of the sound and the most upper harmonics in this case, and you increase those, and it brings clarity to everything. Because if you thought about it, if there was a crowd of people and one person needed to get a message across and desperately needed to be heard, and you gave that person a megaphone, so his voice was the loudest, it would no longer blend into the rest of the voices. The crowd would be all at one level, and he would be at a totally different level. So that's the idea here. You want to make this part louder because you're increasing the good part of the signal that is most perceptible to the human ear. So now that we've gotten here, EQ2 is like cinnamon, because this is where you're really sort of deciding what flavor you're going to add to this pie. It's not that the pie is done yet, but the pie is well on its way. You got the ingredients prepared. And the second compressor, which also does add another slight bit of clarity because of just diminishing the dynamic range, again, is like chopping everything up and you're starting to mix the ingredients together. So that concludes this video. That's all I really had to discuss. We're just talking about additive EQ, and so I hope that after this you understand what additive EQ is. It's meant for you to increase good sounds because when something sounds good, you want more of that. But when something sounds bad, you want less of that. So, of course, that's when you would use it, why you would use it, how much of it to use. That is dependent upon your situation. It seems really obvious to say just make it sound good, but do your best based on the equipment that you have because it may sound good in your room, but it may not sound good somewhere else. But don't be discouraged by that. It's a matter of learning how to treat the acoustics of your own environment. So you learn how much to use depending upon whatever you're EQing, where it was recorded, and what it is. Because I would EQ my voice differently than I would EQ a synthesizer, for example. And so I hope you have some ideas of other effects to try. Multiband compression, spectral shaping, saturation distortion, multiband excitement, which is pretty much the same thing. The plugin Fresh Air by Slate Digital is great. Creating harmonies and mixing them with the original, which is similar to vocal doubling, except vocal doubling typically is not changing the pitch, and compressing reverb, or EQ and reverb for that matter. There's the Abbey Road trick that tries to prevent muddiness. And the final thing that I hope you take away is just understanding the fastidious approach by which you bake bread on a Monday afternoon. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Have an awesome day. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. 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 Amen.